the BVI's quiet role in ESG-linked fund structures, substance, speed, and strategic value. The BVI is not the top-level vehicle in an ESG fund, but it plays a valuable role at the layer beneath, as a feeder fund, co-investment vehicle, or impact SPV, where speed, simplicity, and cost matter. Institutional ESG investors do not categorically exclude BVI vehicles. Eligibility is driven by the structure's conduct, governance, transparency, and reporting, not the jurisdiction alone. Used for the right purpose, with robust reporting and UNPRI-aligned governance, the BVI is a pragmatic and credible component of a sophisticated ESG fund toolkit, addressing the perception problem directly. The British Virgin Islands is sometimes met with scepticism in ESG conversations, largely because of its long association with tax efficiency and confidentiality. That reaction is understandable, but it conflates two distinct questions: whether a jurisdiction is inherently incompatible with ESG objectives, and whether a particular structure is governed and operated in accordance with an appropriate standard. The more useful question is the second, because it is the conduct of a structure, not its domicile alone, that investors and regulators ultimately test. The BVI of today also operates economic substance requirements and a beneficial ownership regime, which narrows the gap between perception and present-day reality. This article offers a balanced, evidence-based view of how BVI vehicles are actually used in ESG-linked fund architectures, and of where they add genuine value and where they do not. Where the BVI fits in the ESG fund ecosystem. In multi-jurisdictional fund structures, the BVI rarely sits at the very top. The primary investor-facing ESG fund and the general partner are typically established in the Cayman Islands, which remain the dominant master fund and GP jurisdictions for ESG mandates. The BVI's value lies at the structural layer beneath, as feeder funds, co-investment vehicles, and special-purpose entities that connect capital to the master structure quickly and economically. This division of roles is deliberate. Each layer is chosen for what it does best, and the BVI earns its place by doing a narrow set of things efficiently. Understood this way, the BVI is not a rival to Cayman or to onshore frameworks, but a complementary tool deployed for defined, practical purposes. 3 structural scenarios in practice. The clearest way to assess the BVI's role is to look at the structures in which it is actually used. Scenario 1. BVI feeder into a Cayman ESG master fund. A common pattern uses a BVI feeder to aggregate capital from a specific investor category before deploying into a Cayman ESG master fund. The speed of incorporation and low ongoing maintenance costs make the BVI an efficient choice here, particularly when a manager needs to stand up a feeder quickly to meet a closing. Because the ESG policy, reporting framework, and investment mandate are set at the master level, the feeder inherits that discipline while keeping the legal wrapper lightweight. For investors with particular regulatory or tax treatment, a dedicated feeder also keeps their participation cleanly ring-fenced from other capital. Scenario 2. BVI limited partnership as a co-investment vehicle. For an infrastructure ESG deal, a BVI limited partnership can serve as a co-investment vehicle alongside the primary fund. Co-investments are frequently one-off or deal-specific, so a lightweight, cost-efficient wrapper is usually preferable to an onshore alternative that carries heavier regulatory overhead. Establishing a bespoke onshore fund for a single asset would rarely be proportionate, whereas a BVI LP can be formed and wound up in line with the life of the deal. The partnership can be tailored to the particular transaction while still incorporating the ESG terms agreed with co-investors. Scenario 3. BVI company as an impact SPV with UNPRI-aligned reporting. A BVI company can be structured as a clean SPV for impact investments, with ESG reporting built directly into its governance framework, rather than added afterwards. Constitutional documents and board mandates can require periodic impact reporting, and the vehicle can be aligned with UNPRI or an equivalent framework from the outset. Where investors want assurance, those reporting obligations can be made contractually enforceable and supported by independent verification. The result is a simple, purpose-built structure whose ESG credibility rests on documented governance rather than jurisdictional assumption. What institutional investors actually require? The decisive question for many managers is whether major institutional ESG investors categorically exclude BVI vehicles. In practice, leading LPs and ESG policy frameworks, including UNPRI signatories and large European pension funds, focus on the conduct of the structure rather than the domicile alone. Governance, transparency, and reporting drive eligibility decisions, and a well-governed BVI vehicle feeding into a European LP base can sit comfortably alongside the EU SFDR expectations that apply at the fund level. Domicile, in other words, is a starting point for diligence rather than a disqualifier. The burden falls on the structure to evidence its standards. A BVI vehicle's ESG credibility is strengthened by a small number of concrete features. Robust ESG reporting provisions in the fund documents. Alignment with UNPRI or an equivalent framework. Side letter commitments on ESG matters. Clear beneficial ownership transparency. When the BVI is, and is not, the right choice. Intellectual honesty about the limits of the BVI strengthens rather than weakens the case for it. The BVI is appropriate when speed and cost efficiency matter, when the vehicle sits as a structural layer beneath a primary ESG fund, or when it is used for a specific co-investment or SPV purpose with appropriate governance overlays. It is less appropriate when the vehicle is the primary fund-level entity under direct scrutiny from ESG-focused LPs, when the mandate requires an onshore regulatory wrapper, such as AIFMD compliance, or when an investor's ESG policy expressly requires a regulated onshore domicile. For main fund vehicles seeking to attract institutional LP capital with ESG mandates, the Cayman Islands remains the primary choice, offering a well-established regulatory framework and broader market acceptance among this investor class. Managers who use the BVI for a role it is not suited to risk avoidable friction in fundraising, which is precisely the outcome careful structuring should prevent. Advising clearly on both sides of that line is itself part of the value, a pragmatic tool in a sophisticated toolkit. The BVI is not competing with Cayman or onshore ESG frameworks. It serves a distinct and legitimate role within them. For advisors and managers, the better instinct is to think structurally rather than jurisdictionally, to ask what each layer of a structure must achieve, and to match the vehicle to that purpose. Used in this way, the BVI is a pragmatic and credible component of a sophisticated ESG fund toolkit. Harneys advises on BVI fund structuring and ESG matters across each of these use cases.